Okay, it looks like we are live. Good evening, everybody. Tonight we're supposed to have Righ on right night, but unfortunately, we got a last minute message that he cannot make it tonight due to some things that came up, and that's okay. So Bill and I are gonna be on for the night. We'll open, uh, you know, the floor for questions and contributions. If by any chance you want to come on live tonight and ask a question or you want to share a story, I'm going to post a link on the social media platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. We're on Twitter live as well. I'm going to post a link and you just need to click on the link. It will bring you to the studio and I will let you in, and then you can make your contributions. So if you have any questions, by all means, we'll be excited to have your questions and also your contributions. Bill, it's always good to have you on
Well,
again
thank you. I
tonight.
appreciate it.
So tonight, Bill has some things that he wants to share. Um, so Bill and I have been doing this for quite a while. We've partnered to do this, and our goal is to see a change in the lives of our children that are, you know, uh, being used as pawns to hurt a lot of dads and moms. So, Bill, how about you?
Yes, thank you. And again, we were prepared to interview a guest tonight and speak with him, but last minute cancellation. We'll just try to go over some things that parents like Ben and I have dealt with going through this process, and we'll just try to share some information, and hopefully other people will relate to what we're going through. They'll understand, and will help them to move forward in their process. Um, so tonight, me personally, I'm still going through my own process, and it has been going on since 2015, and there's still no resolution, and I still have not had a trial on any matters um, throughout this process. Um, so, and again, I'm taking another day off work, and I'm going to start going through a lot of my court documents and making sure a lot of those documents get completed. Currently, I have to make an application to the Supreme Court of Canada to appeal the decision of the Appellate Court of the Province of New Brunswick for letting the judgment of uh, a judge, Dennis Delaquist, stand that he made while he was being investigated by the Canadian Judicial Council on complaints I made, which would have put him in a conflict of interest. Yet he still presided over the session, ruled against me. That was on October 28th, and then on November 14th, 15th, and 16th. He again presided 3 days over other issues, and again um, went against me, and he was still in conflict of interest. And I've since appealed that decision. I filed the paperwork at the appellate court in Fredericton in the province of New Brunswick, but I have not completed all the information to finish the request for appeal. So I'm going to take the day off tomorrow and do that. And tomorrow, I think I will start. I have a Facebook. I have a Facebook page called Parental Alienation in the Family Court System. So tomorrow, while I'm off, I'm going to take the time to start uh, streaming live the work I do to be able to represent myself, where I find the forms and the information I put in those forms to be able to represent myself and make all these motions and applications to the provincial court and the Supreme Court of Canada, and how I get the documents from the agencies that are actively trying to act as barriers to prevent me from getting any information and a delay in me from being able to get to court to have any of the applications or motions I've made in my case to be dealt with. So all I can do is document this, document the abuse of the legal process, and currently I have filed a letter of intent with the province of New Brunswick against the province of New Brunswick and a number of the government agencies that are tasked with helping people that are being abused by the system, such as the New Brunswick Police Commission. Um, the they're supposed to protect individuals from corruption or abuse by the 6 municipal police departments in the province of New Brunswick. And instead, I have evidence that they are colluding with the St. John Police Department to cover up criminal investigations and actively work against me and other parents in similar situations. So these are some of the issues that I'm going to be trying to show people how to deal with. Other people were going to take part in the documentary, Parental Alienation, the family court system, but they have been so abused by the system that they're afraid of any more abuse happening, and they have since decided not to take part. Um, I'm not going to allow the abuse and let them get away with the abuse of the legal system, because the legal system is there to protect the individuals from corruption by these agencies and such as the courts that our tax dollars pay for. This is a service that is there for the people of the province of that province of New Brunswick and each province that people live in. And instead of getting services, you're walking into a biased, discriminatory system. And people need to learn how to stand up for themselves or they'll get rolled over. And I'm going to start tomorrow showing people exactly how to try and stand up for yourselves.
Bill, have you reached out to Tom Maddy, uh, Mackenzie Friends? Um,
No, I haven't. Now, I've asked the province of New Brunswick judges to, because you have to make a request if you'd like to have a Mackenzie friend.
okay.
And none of the judges in this province they've just summarily denied these requests. A friend of mine who has contacted me through the group and was looking for help asked the judge if I could be his Mackenzie friend. And the judge uh, said, I'll be back in 15 minutes, shut down the case because she didn't know how to deal with this or answer his question. So she went back and came back a half hour or so later and said no, denied him his request to have a Mackenzie friend and specifically to have me as his Mackenzie friend to help him with his family court case.
Wow. Yeah, we have Tom Maddy scheduled to come on sometime
That's good.
uh, April, I believe. No, March, I believe, the second week of March. To talk about the how he's been engaged with Mackenzie Friends and the kind of services that he's offering. To people like you and I, that are going through the process, and how we can self-represent. Uh,
That's it. And if people don't have the money to pay for lawyers, they need someone who has gone through the system, know a little bit of how it works, and having that personal experience can make all the difference in the world in helping someone who has no experience and believes that the judicial system runs um, perfectly and they recognize liars and abusers and put conditions on those people for abusing other people. Instead, they usually align with people that create a narrative because whoever creates the false narrative gets to create the bias for the case. So instead of anyone looking to discredit the story they're told, they're just looking for information to corroborate the story they've been told, and they disregard everything else. So while they're doing that, you could be presenting a lot of evidence to show the story or lies that have been told about you are in fact lies, and you are presenting the truth, but it doesn't coincide with the narrative or story they've already been presented. So they disregard it summarily without even looking at it.
I, I I think it's something that the family court need to deal with because for some reason, from personal experience, um, if you're on the truthful side, you are bound to lose. And what I find is those that can come up with stories, they're the ones that usually get their way. And it's unfortunate. There's supposed to be a court that works in the best interest of children. Um, and if somebody is lying, that those lies are going to affect the children. I think something needs to be done. But unfortunately, that's not the case. It looks like I see the family court as a place where you can lie and get away with it. And there's a
Yes,
family court.
there's no
This is a court.
repercussions. In fact, the more people lie, usually the more they're rewarded. And that's what perpetuates the cycle and what keeps these cases going on for years. And in cases of alienation, they have been recognized by people that have hired a lawyer, spent a lot of money, and took 8 to 10 years battling against the false narrative that was created. And the only way they overcame these obstacles and barriers in front of them was by hiring a lawyer who would fight for them and try to protect their rights, and having a trained professional that can make a medical diagnosis of parental alienation and the situation that is going on. Because without that, um, judges just don't understand this. This is a medical diagnosis, and people that don't have the ability to make a medical diagnosis are usually the ones tasked with trying to figure out what's going on with these cases and the situations. It's like you go to a CAT scan, you go to the hospital, have a CAT scan, and you go to a professional that is trained to read CAT scans to determine what's wrong with you, or if there is a problem with this CAT scan. If you go to your general practitioner doctor or a nurse, they don't have the training or qualifications to recognize what they're looking at. And then, because they are not qualified to make a diagnosis or recognize what they're looking at, they're never going to come to the proper diagnosis. And that's what leads to these cases being prolonged for years, because they don't have anyone that can step in and say, or put their reputation on the line, say, this is abuse. Abuse is happening, and this is the party that is committing the abuse. Instead, most people want to stay away from these cases because they don't know how to identify the abuser and the victim of the abuse.
And I find the office of the children's lawyer
Yes.
tend to side a lot with the with those that are able to come up with stories. And these are supposed to be representing children. They work in the interest of the kids that are involved in a lot of these court cases, and often at times they tend to be very biased. I mean, I can tell of my own personal story where the OCO was so obvious, it was so obvious, and there was no way out of it, right? And this you know person was just very biased, very
Mm-hmm.
biased because you have one party that is able to come up with a lot of stories, even though you are providing a lot of evidence to debunk whatever is being said. Yet it appears that they make up their mind based on the false narratives that they hear to draw their conclusions in the reports that they issue to the courts.
And that's it. They've already created a scenario in their head that they believe is happening, and instead of looking at the evidence, they're very dismissive of anything that the person who is being accused presents, because they, instead of looking at it as evidence, they said, well, you're just being argumentative, and dismiss this information instead of looking at it for what it is real evidence of coercive and controlling behaviors in the context of family violence, which is recognized under the new Divorce Act. And the problem is, you've got judges that are 70 years old, 60, 70 years old. Well, let's say they finished education by 30. So if they're 60 or 70 years old, they've had no ongoing training or education in 30 or 40 years. Now, most most of the science and information around parental alienation has come during the last 10 years. So even now, when you have students graduating from psychiatry, psychology, medical professionals, going through or into this field, it's still not part of the curriculum that they're learning. They're not learning the newest and latest information on this process or this pathology. So there's a failure to recognize, and because of that, um, most professionals aren't willing to stake their reputation and go to court and say, yes, this person is a liar. This person is telling the truth. This is a person. There's not many people that have the experience as well as the knowledge to be able to go and definitively make that assertion. And that is where uh, this process stops because no one wants to step in and help. And that's kind of where we're at right now with my case.
So in this case, do we have a need for the OCL? If they pick up a case that um, in their minds they've already made a decision
Yes,
as to which
yes.
side
It's
they
an
are leaning to. Go ahead, Bill.
see,
Go ahead.
the courts are an adversarial system. So that's what they do is they pick sides. And once they pick a side, they stick with it just because they're arrogant. They believe they know everything. They haven't been to training in 30 or 40 years. They have no understanding of this, of parental alienation or what it is, because it was first recognized and labeled by Richard Gardner, a Harvard-trained child psychiatrist in 1987. And he recognized 8 alienating behaviors in cases like this and labeled it parental alienation syndrome. Now, because it was rather vague and expansive in 8 different indicators, and there was no criteria which does parental alienation happen if there's 3 indicators or 4 indicators, 5, 6, 7, 8? How many indicators need to be present before this is a case of abuse? And that wasn't clearly identified, which is why it was never added to the DSM-5. Since then, it has been refined to the 5-factor model and 4-factor model to identify parental alienation. And these models have been used successfully and have been peer reviewed with a success rate of around 93% for identifying parental alienation.
Now, when when we focus about custody battles, right?
Yep.
I know there are a lot of dads groups, Facebook groups, a lot of moms groups, grandparents, um, and often at times the focus is more on the parents, being denied access. I think the focus often at times has been on us as opposed to the children. Do you think that has been the reason why we haven't made much gains in making parental alienation, uh, you know,
Yeah,
an issue in the system?
there's a real reason why there's been no gains, no recognition. Since Richard Gardner recognized these 8 behaviors and his work was very good, they couldn't attack his work, so he was attacked personally, and he was labeled as a pedophile by groups that were, by 2 groups basically, that didn't want uh, parental alienation recognized. So feminists, because they still want the mothers to get custody. And in Canada, if a child is living with a single parent, 86% chance it is with the mother. Only 6% chance that it is with the father. So feminist groups have worked to keep parental alienation out of this because it is a form of abuse that is not gendered. It is perpetrated by a person that suffers from a mental health disorder or a personality disorder, such as narcissistic or borderline personality disorder. Now, people with either narcissistic or borderline personality disorder do not go to seek treatment or help because there's nothing wrong with them. It's everyone else. Amber Heard and Angelina Jolie would be a couple of examples of high profile cases where they both have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. So when you go to court and you are dealing with a situation like this, where there is an 80% overlap between the behaviors and indicators of a person that suffers from borderline personality disorder and a person that is suffering from PTSD, it's almost impossible for a person without the proper training or knowledge to identify which they are. And that's where the problem lies. And it's very easy to create division by saying men are evil, men are abusive. So it's not the women. Women wouldn't hurt their children, but men would, because they don't have the same bond. They try to create division, and the government, the federal government, the government of Canada, has hired people like Linda C. Nielsen here in the province of New Brunswick, who is a lawyer, and she's got an honorary doctorate in social sciences to write reports for the federal government as an expert in the field of parental alienation. She's not a medical doctor. She's a lawyer, and she's writing these reports and has been writing these reports since 2003 for the federal government as Dr. Linda C. Nielsen. So it's very misleading. And her viewpoint of parental alienation is that this was a term created by abusive men who wanted to have custody or access to their children. And the study she used to corroborate this came from, one of them was from a study done in Australia, where they went to a prison and spoke to convicted criminals and asked them if they had ever used the term parental alienation as part of their court case to try and see their children. And taken a very small percentage of the population, men that are in prison, they took that information and said, some certain percentage of men say this, but these men are abusive. So now they've gone and searched out, they found a group of convicted criminals, and they're trying to use they're trying to use the information they gathered from these convicted criminals and say they're doing a scientific study that's non-biased, that shows a general census of the population, and it's not true. What they did was they found a group of convicted criminals who are in jail, not fathers like you and I who have jobs and work every day and are productive members of society. And all we're trying to do is be good, loving parents to our children. And because of that, the federal government, the Canadian government, the provincial government has hired people like Linda C. Nielsen to perpetuate this false narrative, this story that men are abusive. And they go and look to try and create documentation to say, look, this is just like I said. Of course they're going to find men are abusive. They went and found convicted criminals. And when you talk about people that suffer from borderline or narcissistic personality disorder, there's only two places that these personality disorders are ever diagnosed or recognized. They're not recognized from the general population because people with these personality disorders don't go and seek help. The only time they're recognized or people are able to view these personality disorders are in two places. First one, prison, court-ordered psychological evaluation. Second one, family court, court-ordered psychological evaluation. So people, even trained professionals that don't see people with narcissistic or borderline personality disorder, can mistake it very easily because they don't have any experience with dealing with these disorders. And since there is an 80% overlap between a person that suffers from PTSD and a person that suffers from borderline personality disorder, it's very easy to make the wrong initial diagnosis by how the people present. And this is why the courts make the wrong decisions 95% of the time, according to Dr. Stephen Miller. He conducted a study in 2014 for the state of Massachusetts and found that because when people go to court and they don't present as normal range behavior, that the judge and the court believes they are the problem and cause of all the problems in this relationship. And 95% of the time will make decisions against the party. And that's because of how they present. They don't present and display like a normal range person. They're not displaying normal range behavior. And they shouldn't, because they're traumatized. They are the victims of abuse. They are being abused, and the courts fail to recognize this abuse and further abuse them and tell them they're the cause of the problem and make more decisions against them. And I believe this is why the suicide rates in Canada, around the world, specifically in men, are higher than they are in women. And there was a study conducted recently, and a friend of mine provided it to me. And it showed that when women were subjected to the same court experience that men were, that their suicide rates skyrocketed and were basically on par with men's. I will be interviewing Alexandra Lisova, who is from Russia, and she came to North America after recognizing a pattern of abuse that men are subjected to in Russia, and came over to North America to study it. And she is currently teaching and is, I believe, one of
Yes,
the
Frasier. Yeah, it's even
most
Frasier, you know.
professional in this field to recognize men are suffering more from abuse than women currently in our society.
And yeah, she might be coming on the show as well.
That would be great. It would
Yeah,
be great to speak with her.
she's most likely to come on the show. I've already reached out to her. Um, but the interesting thing is, Bill, the a lot of these judges are trained to fish out who is being genuine and who is being dramatic.
The
Um,
honestly, the courts don't care, and the people involved there don't care. They don't want to get involved in these situations because, again, they're going to be attacked by the person with a personality disorder, and they'll try to discredit them and say they're discriminatory or they don't have the qualifications, and they'll be attacked because that's what they do. They attack relentlessly anyone and everyone that doesn't side with them.
so, Bill, let's talk about your documentary. Uh,
Okay.
can you, tell us, what it's all about? When is it coming out? You know, I've been looking forward to it. So let's just talk about it.
Okay. Certainly.
What's yeah.
Um, I had hoped I had hoped to get this done prior to COVID. Once COVID came out, that kind of put a halt to everything because there were other people. I didn't want this just to be about me in my case, because a lot of other people were contacting me and telling me they were going through the same thing. So I told them to keep track of what they were going through, and we've all documented the process we've been through and how this process is abusive to the parties involved and specifically the children. And there were a number of people that wanted to take part in that, but they've been so abused by the court, they're afraid to. An example is the courts, they've already created a status quo. So my case began in 2015. Here we are in 2022. Still haven't had a trial on any of the issues. And every judgment that has happened has been against me. And in fact, the last judgment, the judge awarded costs to my ex when she didn't even make the application for it. And neither one of us have lawyers. So this is one of the last steps the courts do to try and keep a person from trying to get the abuse that they've been subjected to recognized. They're basically threatening them with cost if you decide to move forward and try to present your evidence. Because if we go to trial and you lose, we're going to award the other party thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
So I've got court recordings of judges saying that to me. And the judge just did that to me. And my ex didn't make an application for costs. He just awarded her costs. The next step is for them to try and take custody away from me. And that is what the judge did. He ordered a VOC to take place. Now, I'm all for it. I've been requesting for years to have a professional come in and take a look at this case so they can make a proper diagnosis and determine what is going on so we can get some resolution to this. And that's just what I'm hoping for. Now, to give you an example of why these cases go on and why there needs to be more understanding about this process, when I was in court in November, prior to the judge saying that he was going to order a VOC or was thinking about ordering a VOC, he said, well, I'll start back. Do you know what adultification is? That is a form of abuse where a parent tells the child, oh, you don't have to listen to your mother or you don't have to listen to your father. You're a grown up. You can make your own decisions. You can do whatever you want. So now you're creating an inverted hierarchy in the family systems where that parent who is telling the child this and trying to put them in an elevated position in the hierarchy to create a splitting between the relationship with that parent. And children, they don't have any legal rights until the age of 18, and there's a reason for it. They don't make good decisions for themselves. And that's why we're there as parents, to help them make sure they get to school, make sure they get fed, make sure they get bathed, make sure they're clothed, make sure they don't lose everything and they have a home to live in. Children don't always make the best decisions. And putting a child in the position where they believe they can make better decisions than a parent is a form of abuse. It's called adultification. And it's a form of coercive and controlling behavior and manipulation to try and split the relationship between the child and the parent they're told they don't have to listen to because they're an adult and they can make their own decisions. So when I was in court and the judge was contemplating whether or not he would order a VOC, a voice of the child, he was saying, we're not gonna make this decision based on either of the parents. We're not going to make it on this party or that party. We're going to do this on the viewpoint of the children. So my children are 10 and 12 years old. And for a court to say that they're going to leave the decision and all the decision-making power for the future of the children in the hands of a 10 and 12-year-old over the parents is another form of adultification. So the court and the judge, he believes this is the best course forward because, again, he believes that the story has been told by the one party, and he believes the children don't want to go with one parent because of what he has been told. And he's aligning and he's trying to aid to award that parent custody. And that's where the other people have gotten to that wanted to take part in this documentary, but are now afraid to. They've already lost the cost awards and had to pay thousands of dollars in legal fees because they just wanted to keep their children in their lives and they weren't being allowed to see them. So on top of not being able to see their children and fighting to keep their children in their life, to be able to see their children, now the judge is imposing a penalty of thousands of dollars, and they almost forced one of the parties to sell their house to pay for the costs. Can you imagine? And basically that's what happened to me. I was forced to sell my home, and the proceeds from the sale of the house were withheld from me for a year. So I was homeless for a year with no income, no money, no home. And that's what they try to do. It's the same process. It's the same steps. They've already taken a side. They've created the status quo, and they just want you to go away. And the more you try to present the truth and the real story to them, the madder they get because they've already made a decision on this. And they're arrogant. They know everything. And you don't know the law. You can't present this information. You don't know what you're talking about. So you go away. And if you don't go away, I'm going to award some money to the other party. Then I'm going to take your child from you. And that's exactly the process that happens.
But Bill, just going back to you know, from what I've gathered from from the Ministry of Justice website, that a lot of these family cases supposed to last for about 2 years. That's what they say. But I've had a couple of people tell me that they've gone as far as 7 years. Mine went as far as 7 years as well. So it appears that 7 years is the standard. Now, is this part of the lawyers, strategy to basically train the parents that are involved? Because for every 3 months, basically the way it's set up, every 3 months you have to go to a case conference.
Yes. So, and they're usually not that frequent. And again, you're right. There is a certain time where most people give up. And then there's the time where the people that continue to fight and they get the experts, like Richard Warshak has testified in a case here in Canada. And it was the judge recognized the professional report and diagnosis of Dr. Richard Warshak and changed the custody and access from one parent to the other and ordered the children to fly to Texas to undergo reunification therapy. And not that I don't remember how long that case went on, but there's also another case in Ontario that went on for 10 years. And after 10 years, the courts finally recognized that the mother in this case was being being abusive, was abusing the legal process, was subjecting the children to alienation. And it took 10 years for them to finally recognize this process because that's what it is. It's a process. And in New Brunswick, 98% of the court cases in family court do not go to trial. Only 2% go to trial. So if the judges delay and delay and delay, it is more likely this case is not going to go to trial. Or even if it does go to trial, the status quo has been created. Now, are you familiar with Martin Berenson?
Mhm. Yeah,
Martin Berenson is from Peru, and
yeah.
he had joint and shared custody in Peru. The mother fled to Canada with the son. And because the court in Ontario delayed and delayed and delayed, the judgment in that case was the status quo for this child has been created. He's developed roots here in Canada, so we're not going to follow the court order that was made in Peru, and we're not going to return the child to the father, even though the mother kidnapped him and brought him to this country illegally in contravention of a court order. And that's the reality of what happens if the status quo is created. The judges don't want to do anything other than leave the status quo.
Now, just talking about the fear factor that's involved in getting people to speak out. I mean, going back to your documentary, I know I'm not sure if you ever connected with Cam. Cam is on the group as Cam G. At some point, he was basically reaching out to people, with some interview questions. Basically, he was trying to put together, I believe, a documentary as well. Uh,
Okay.
so uh, I'm sure he's online, probably with us tonight. He might be able to connect, with you to see. I'd love to see this documentary come out, and if you know,
I'd like to too. And what's happening is the process is still ongoing. Now, there was one couple who are still fighting, and I wanted to try and focus on their case. So instead of just focusing on parental alienation, the family court system, I've asked them if they'd like to take part in their own, basically about their case, and give them the time to dedicate to their case and show what's going on and the corruption they've suffered through there. And I, uh, I called that one Destroying Families. So I've made up a trailer for Destroying Families. It's almost a minute long. I've interviewed the couple, and they have been fighting for quite some time, and they're still willing to tell their story and share the abuse that they've been subjected to. And I, I'm gonna let them share that because it's wrong what's going on and what's happening to them and how they're being abused and their children are being abused.
So the system is structured, basically because two parents will go through the system. The situation may not be as worse as you know um, to a point where they'll have to go through it, because what I find is, you may have some level of agreement before you start the process, the court process, and after the court process, you become the worst enemies.
Yes. Once you start in the court process, you have no control over anything. And the only thing that will help you is having a lawyer that does recognize parental alienation, is familiar with the laws, and is willing to fight for you. If not, you're going to end up getting dumped by that lawyer after a judge makes a decision. And then you're going to be left with nothing. You'll have no money, no children, and you'll be further traumatized because you're not seeing your children. And then at that point, it becomes almost impossible for you to represent yourself coherently or positively because you are so traumatized. You need help to recover. You need help. I have been going through this process for 7 years. I have taken the time to study a lot of the psychology and the pathology associated with the people that create these situations and the situations that go on. I've also had to learn a lot of the law so I could represent myself. And let me tell you, you're fighting a system who wants you to go away. They don't want to hear the truth because then they'd have to acknowledge they made mistakes, and they allowed child abuse to happen. In fact, not only did they allow child abuse to happen, they supported it. And no one wants to acknowledge that. It's easier to just duck their heads in the sand, send you away, you make an application. No, we're going to award them costs for you making that application. You go away. And they further abuse you until some people, they just can't take it anymore. And again, that's where um, suicide rates in men are so high, I believe. Uh, a study that was conducted in Sweden years ago showed that when parents are alienated or kept from their children, 50% of them, 50%, 50% had thoughts of suicidal ideation. That's half of the people. And they're the ones that disclosed. Not everyone discloses.
That's true.
So automatically, any parent who is being kept from their children, 50% of them have thought of suicide, according to the study conducted in Sweden. This is the largest study of its kind conducted, and it's very accurate. And what they're finding was it was closely 50-50 men versus women who alienated children. So it had nothing to do with men did this or women did this. It was people that suffered from a personality disorder did this. It had no reflection on whether it was a man or a woman.
It's funny. You're sharing this. Just I believe on Thursday after the shot, it was on Friday. I started getting. You may have gotten the same message from somebody on Facebook. This suicidal thoughts, um, and it was quite scary because I was just sitting there holding the phone, reading through the messages, and for a moment, I'm like, okay, how do I, connect with this person to, to help, because uh, it's the most, painful process to put anybody through. When especially, so imagine adults are having suicidal thoughts. What about the children that are involved? A child that is, so yearning to see the other parent, and that child is being denied, that right.
No,
So if adults are thinking this way, what happens to children, right?
no. It's been studied that as soon as a parent commits suicide, their children are automatically 50% more likely to commit suicide. And I I had a session with Gregory Zed, who is retired in the province of New Brunswick, but he's a clinical suicidologist, the only clinical suicidologist in the province of New Brunswick. And what he said is over the past 10 to 20 years, after the suicide statistics for children remaining static since they started recording these statistics, there has been an increase globally. And the increase has been so dramatic, it's doubled and even tripled in some areas of children committing suicide after remaining static for since they started keeping track of these numbers. And I believe this is directly related to the family courts creating the situation where they are splitting up the families, interfering with the children's normal growth and development, the process of their growth and development. Judges and courts telling children they're able to make decisions over their parents for how they're going to spend the rest of their life and the decisions they make, and they can't. They can't. And because of that, they're creating an inequality between the parents and an imbalance in the relationship, which breaks the growth and development pattern of the children. And they don't develop normal attachment bonds because of this break in the hierarchy of the family systems.
Now, is there have you come across any statistics at the federal level that connects the suicidal rates among children to the family court system? Is there any data that you've come across that?
Oh, I've seen reports from CBC or CTV. I can't remember, and I have them saved. But they've done articles where they've seen an increase in child suicides, but no one knows why. And if you look back to people that commit suicide, it's not that they don't want to live. They are in so much pain that they don't want to live with that pain anymore. It's not that they don't want to live, and it's just they don't see an end to the abuse they're being subjected to. And a good example of this was a study conducted by the American Psychological Association, who put out the book, the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, Volume 5. This is the 5th edition, where they identify different mental health disorders, and they use this to do the billing for insurance companies. So I can't remember if it was 2012 or 2014. They conducted a study where they studied two groups of children that were subjected to abuse to determine whether one form of abuse was worse than the other.
Mm.
So they took two groups of children, one that suffered from physical and sexual abuse, and another group that suffered from psychological and emotional abuse. Now, psychological and emotional abuse can also be neglect. So after comparing these two groups and looking at all the numbers and trying to do the comparisons to see which one is more damaging or which group has a higher rate or what's the difference between these two and how does this affect them differently, they found that all the indicators for both groups that suffered from abuse, whether physical or psychological and emotional, were identical except for one indicator. There was one indicator that was slightly different between the two groups. That one group had a higher rate of suicide than the other group. Other than that, all identifiers and indicators were the same. You know which group had the higher rate of suicide?
I guess more connected to the family court, right?
The psychological and emotionally abused children. So this is a situation where if you go to the police or you tell a parent that this child is being beaten or molested and we need to protect them, and police start breaking down doors to go in and protect the child from this abuse, when psychological and emotional abuse, according to this study, is just as damaging, if not more so, than physical and sexual abuse. Now, the province of New Brunswick doesn't have anyone that works for the Child Protection Agency of the Department of Social Development that is qualified to recognize psychological or emotional abuse. So in the province of New Brunswick, every case of psychological and emotional abuse is being dismissed because they don't have people qualified to determine whether or not psychological or emotional abuse is happening. And that's why I filed a lawsuit against the province of New Brunswick Child Protection Agency for negligence, because I've provided them with diagnostic indicators to give them a clinical diagnosis of child psychological abuse, and they failed to recognize that and dismissed the cases and have allowed my children to stay in an abusive situation.
I'm so sorry to hear this, Bill.
Thank you.
It's
So,
you know, I mean, children are so precious, and for anyone to put them through, you know, such level of abuse, I just don't know how to describe them other than just to say it's just pure evil towards the
yeah,
children. Um, one thing that I always say is if you truly love a child as your own, your blood, you know, uh, you won't put them through such trauma. It's you
you want
know,
to protect them.
yeah, exactly, right. You will do everything you can do, to shield them from attacks from outside. But here's the case, from within, they are being destroyed. They are being destroyed emotionally. It affects their social development. It affects everything,
Yeah,
and so
and
they grow up, with a lot of thoughts in their heads. And I was talking to a friend who works in the juvenile, uh, who was sharing with me that there are a lot of children in the juveniles that are so angry. Most of them
yes,
are in prison because of anger.
yeah,
And after having a one-on-one interview with all of them, the common thing among all of them is that one parent was never home. And you know, pretty much majority of them, they did not have a father at home. And
yeah, and
so they grew up discovering that they've been deceived, they've been lied to, and because of that lie that they had to sort of hear when they were growing up, when they got to that age where they found out that they've been lied to, there was a level of anger that they basically developed. And out of that anger, they began to do a lot of foolishness,
mhm,
which ended them up in the juveniles.
yes,
And, you know, I, I don't think a normal parent would go to that extent of destroying a child, destroying the other parent to the child, thinking that it's okay, it's normal, it's evil. It's just not right.
the Boy Crisis was a book written by Warren Farrell,
Mm-hmm.
and both him and Jordan Peterson spoke about the the epidemic of children being raised in fatherless homes and how this is um, destroying society, and how 90% of children that are growing up in fatherless homes end up in prison, or it might not be 90% in prison, it might be 90% that suffer from addictions. There is a whole slew of numbers associated with children growing up in fatherless homes from the United States. And the reason they are able to track this number is because of Title 4D funding. So when parents separate and the mother is getting funding from the government, they know exactly how many children they're paying for. And when you look at those statistics and the active shooters and school shooters in the United States, I believe at last count, when you looked at the number of active shooters or school shooters, 23 out of 24 of them had come from fatherless homes.
Wow.
So that's a staggering number. And that's not just a freak statistical number. That's a statistical anomaly. For 23 out of 24 of the school shooters, active shooters in the United States to come from fatherless homes, there's a definite correlation, and this is highlighted in the book "The Boy Crisis" by Warren Farrell.
We should be able to get him on one of these days. I know there has been a connection that I have to follow up on. Uh, but there's an interest there to have him on. It's I mean these crises are real. It's you know, and we're going to end up having a generation of you know uh, boys that are just damaged, um, and society is going to have to pay a price for that because uh, we failed them. And part of what we are doing now, you and I, Bill, is to raise that awareness to save those boys, save those girls as well,
Save
not lead them
everybody.
down the wrong path. Yeah. Yeah.
Without learning and developing proper attachment bonds, children will end up growing up. If one of their parents suffers from personality disorder, such as borderline or narcissistic personality disorder,
Mhm.
that's where they are going to start to develop their unresolved trauma, which is where these pathologies begin. And this is where the or the transgenerational pathology happens. So when children are growing up in a dysfunctional family unit, and there's a divorce, and the children are taught that there's an inverted hierarchy where they're at the top of the pyramid and they can make the decisions for themselves, they don't grow up with normal boundaries. And that's why they end up in juvenile detention centers, because they don't have respect for anything or anyone, and they have no boundaries, and no one can impose boundaries on them. They just think they can do whatever they want
Mhm.
until someone tells them they can't.
Mhm. One of the things that I am still trying to establish some contacts is to be able to go to the juveniles and talk to some of these kids myself, and that if I'll be allowed to record them and air them, that would be great. But it'd be nice to hear these things directly from them and how they feel that society as a whole have failed them. Right? They don't deserve to be there, but there were situations or crises that were not, uh, you know, were not able to be contained. And you can't really blame them, right? It's just they find themselves in those situations, and unfortunately, we have a responsibility to speak out so it doesn't happen to other generations as well. It's
Yes,
just wrong.
yes, because if we don't stop them and teach them that their behavior is wrong, they'll grow up perpetuating the cycle that they've
Yes.
learned and go on and teach that to their children,
Yes.
because they believe that is how families function,
Hmm.
and they'll go on sharing that pathology for generations.
Hmm. Hmm. And unfortunately, Canada was a place that people look up to raise families. Have a very strong, solid uh, family, but that's not the case. The social family truly is failing in Canada. A lot of broken homes, and the system is contributing to it. The system is playing a significant role to destroy homes, and that's unfortunate. I mean, a lot of people
You're
look
right.
up to Canada. A lot of people look up to Canada, and I hear people you know outside of the country, and they all talk about how the fear that when you migrate to Canada, the chances of your family breaking down is very likely, and it's true. There
Yes.
there are there are a lot of stories out there, which is quite unfortunate.
I've seen an article recently where it was just this past week, where there was a law firm who was looking at doing collaborative divorces and trying to settle things instead of being confrontational and adversarial. They're trying to work with both parents to come to a peaceful and equitable resolution to the marriage, so this process doesn't drag on for years. And um, uh, they've been named to uh, go in for the Nobel Peace Prize for the work they're doing and trying to be collaborative. This law firm. Um, I'll send you the article when I find it.
Yeah.
I wish I could remember more of it. I just remember that They were the, someone had nominated them for the Nobel Peace Prize for the work they were doing and trying to help families, because this is a global situation where families are being destroyed by the family court systems around the world. So it's the system is very broken, and everyone in the courtroom except for the two people that are there arguing are being paid to be there.
Yeah.
So what they're doing is they're draining the resources of these families, and they're
Yeah.
traumatizing these families and their children in this process instead of trying to help them.
Yeah.
That's what they're supposed to be there to do,
Yeah.
is to help them resolve these issues and
Mhm.
do so in the best interest of the children. And when they believe, the judges believe that the children can make the best decisions for their lives over the parents when they're 10 and 12 years old, they're sharing in the delusion that children can make adult decisions. And they're allowing children to be subjected to this form of abuse of adultification, because children are not capable of making those decisions in these matters.
Yeah.
And most likely they'll align with their abuser, because if one parent gives love unconditionally, they're not going to be afraid of upsetting or hurting that parent, because they know that parent is always going to love them.
Mhm.
If the other person uses coercion, control, manipulation, and doles out love as or affection as a reward for good behavior, like saying bad things about mommy or bad things about daddy, then I'll hug you and tell you I love you. But if you say anything about him that I don't like, or about her that I don't like, you are going to be treated terribly.
Yeah.
And this pattern, this is where Stockholm syndrome comes from.
Yeah.
It's a cycle of abuse and affection when they're they behave properly, or they say the right things. And because of that, when you have children go to court and say they'd rather be with mommy or they'd rather be with daddy, but they can't articulate why, then this thought has been planted there. This is the they're saying this because they've been coerced or manipulated to say these things. If they can't articulate why they're afraid of one parent or they don't want to be with a parent, then it's been placed there. And the problem is, people that don't know how to recognize that, all they hear is a child saying, I don't want to go with mommy. I don't want to go with daddy. Well, there's got to be a reason for that. So they automatically have a biased opinion of the party they're being told that about.
Right. Right. All right. Our time is almost up.
Yeah.
Uh, but we're gonna bring the show to an end. But just to our audience, and I'm gonna next Sunday, Bill, we have Mark Fidelman, who's coming uh, on the show.
Okay. That's great.
Um, you know, Mark runs an organization for the rights of children, uh, uh, and basically the organization is called Kids Honor, and it would be amazing to have him on to hear from him and the work he's doing to help a lot of kids that are caught up in the system.
Hmm.
Every child's life matter. It's not about you know uh, the parents that are involved, but it's about the future of those children, right? And so I'm very excited to have him on. Next Sunday. Next Sunday will be on at 6 p.m.
Yep.
And yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm looking forward
So
to
am
it.
I. Thank you for allowing me to take part in this again, Ben. I really appreciate you allowing me the opportunity to speak and share my thoughts and opinions on these matters.
It's a teamwork, Bill. It's a teamwork. It's a teamwork. Thank you too for your time, and to our audience, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are back next Sunday. Please, share our social media, platforms, our YouTube channels. The more people we have on, the more people we have hearing these stories, the better off we are as a society. To raise awareness, there are a lot of children that are hurting, a lot of children that are finding themselves in prison just because they are just angry that mom and dad could not, get along, or a mom or a dad is manipulating them to favor, the other party, A lot of grandparents are being denied access, to their own grandchildren, which is unfortunate. I mean, this is this is not the kind of society that we want for our children, because whatever we instill in them today is what they are going to grow up with. It will become a vicious cycle, and future generations are going to pay a price for it. You and I have a responsibility. We have an opportunity to fix this problem now, and so let's just fix it. Let's just speak out. Let's just make it known, to our politicians that we need change. Change for the children, not for us. It's more for the children. It's more for what we want to see the world become. A world becoming a better place for our children to have a happy life, and for them also to pass it on uh, to other generations. Thank you so much for your time, and have a good night. Again, Bill and I are always on Facebook. If you have any questions, or if you want to participate on the podcast show, by all means, message us, and we'll be more than happy to connect you. Thank you so much, and have a good night.